Story 1. I found a strange fang in the woods, and it ruined my life. The forest was alive again with the bright dawn, yet the air was thick with an unsettling silence. I lay on the ground, the moss beneath me cold and brittle. My head pounded, each beat a relentless drum in my temples. The cry for help still echoed in my mind, though I couldn't tell if it was mine or someone else's. The world around me was a blur, the towering trees swaying ominously in the morning breeze. As I struggled to sit up, the world spun, forcing me to clutch at the ground for balance. My hands were trembling, the dirt beneath my fingers a stark reminder of the night's events. The forest floor was littered with leaves, some disturbed, others untouched, each one a silent witness to the chaos that had unfolded. My memory was fragmented, like pieces of a shattered mirror reflecting distorted images. I recalled walking through the forest, the moonlight casting long shadows, each step deeper into the woods. Then a sound low, guttural, something primal. My heart raced as I thought of it, the fear fresh and raw. I stood, brushing off the dirt, my movements slow and deliberate. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and something metallic, blood. My stomach churned at the thought. I looked down at my hands, the memory of warmth on my skin, though they were clean now. The confusion was suffocating, each breath a struggle. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees looming above. As I stumbled forward, my thoughts drifted to Beatrice, her laughter echoing in my mind, now replaced with the haunting stillness of the forest. The weight of the unspoken truth pressed heavily on my chest, making each breath a laborious task. I took a step forward, the crunch of leaves beneath my foot breaking the silence. The path ahead was unclear, but I knew I had to move. The forest was no longer a place of wonder, but a realm of dread. Each step a journey deeper into the unknown. The fear was palpable, a living entity that would not let me go. My heart quickened as I stumbled along, afraid of what I knew what I would see. I paused, hesitant to step forward, to see the truth. The familiar landmarks were now strangers in this altered reality. The forest, once a place of magic and discovery, was now a labyrinth of horrors. The cry for help echoed again, this time a call to myself, a reminder of what I had done. Then I woke up. I can still feel the weight of the dream pressing down on me again, the images still sharp in my mind. Every night since it happened, I have had that dream. The forest, the fear, the overwhelming sense of dread, all feels like it did that night. It forces me to remember, and then I remember what happened to her. I shudder involuntarily, and a new despair grips me, and I wake again into the nightmare that is my continued existence. I suppose you could call this a confession, though I'm not entirely sure. The truth about what happened in the forest needs to be told, yet I'm torn about revealing it. Beatrice, she was killed, but not by a wild animal as everyone thought. What took her life was far more terrifying. It all happened just a month ago during a camping trip, when I stumbled upon that cursed fang and this nightmare began. The drive along the Olympic Peninsula was beautiful, a tapestry of emerald and amber, with sunlight filtering through the dense canopy above, casting pretty patterns on the winding road. The air was thick with the scent of pine trees and moss, a primordial aroma that filled the car as we rolled down the windows, letting the crisp air mingle with our excitement. Beatrice sat beside me, her hair dancing in the breeze, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. She hummed along to the music, her voice soft and melodic, a sound that had become as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. I glanced at her, watching as she leaned her head against the window, her gaze lost in the passing landscape. Her profile was silhouetted against the vibrant greens of the forest, and for a moment I felt a surge of love and nervousness. The small box in my pocket, containing the ring I had chosen for her, felt heavier with each mile. I had planned this trip meticulously, wanting every moment to be perfect, especially the one when I would ask her to spend the rest of her life with me. We had met a year ago, in a campsite not far from here, our paths crossing in the midst of nature's splendor. She had been setting up her tent with the efficiency of someone who had done it 100 times, while I struggled with mine, my inexperience evident. Her laughter, warm and inviting, had drawn me in, and before I knew it, we were sharing stories and laughter around a campfire. Now, here we were, returning to the wilderness that had brought us together, ready to embark on a new chapter. As we turned a bend, the campsite came into view. A small clearing nestled among towering evergreens. The trees stood like sentinels, their branches swaying gently in the wind, their leaves rustling softly. The clearing was carpeted with moss, a soft emerald green that seemed to glow in the fading light of day. Beatrice gasped, her eyes lighting up with delight. "It's perfect," she whispered, her voice filled with delight. We pulled into the campsite, the gravel crunching beneath the tires. The absence of a park ranger was immediately noticeable, but I brushed it off, attributing it to the seclusion of the area. We were, after all, in a remote part of the peninsula, far from the main tourist trails. Beatrice, ever the practical one, took charge of setting up the tent while I gathered firewood, our movements efficient and practiced from years of shared adventures. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the clearing, a sense of unease began to settle over me. The forest, which had seemed so welcoming just hours before, now felt oppressive, the silence between the trees heavy and foreboding. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling lingered, a nagging sense that something was off. Beatrice, ever attuned to my moods, noticed my distraction. "Hey, everything okay?" she asked, her voice soft with concern as she placed a hand on my arm. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just a bit tired, I guess." She looked at me, her eyes searching, but she didn't press. Instead, she squeezed my hand gently and returned to setting up the tent. I watched her, feeling a pang of guilt for not being honest. But I didn't want to ruin the trip, not yet. I had plans, promises to keep, and a future to build. As the darkness deepened, the forest came alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures, their calls echoing through the trees. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows on the surrounding trees, making them seem to move and twist in the light. Beatrice sat close to me, her warmth a comforting presence, and I knew I had to tell her soon. But for now, I just held her hand, the ring box pressing against my leg, a reminder of the promise I was about to make. The night wore on, the stars twinkling above, and the forest holding its breath. I knew that this trip was just the beginning, a step into the unknown, where the beauty of nature could quickly turn into something more sinister. But in that moment, with Beatrice by my side, I felt a sense of peace, a sense of belonging. I had no idea then of how fragile the peace was. Worse still, that the darkness that lurked within the trees was only the beginning of the nightmare that would ruin our future. We woke up to a new day. The morning sun filtered through the dense canopy above, casting a warm glow over the campsite. The air was crisp and invigorating. Beatrice and I packed our backpacks with water, snacks, and the park map, eager to explore the trails that moved through the Olympic Peninsula. The absence of a park ranger still lingered in my mind, but I pushed it aside, determined to enjoy our time together. As we set off on the hike, the trail was everything I had imagined, with the soft rustle of leaves and the distant call of birds. Beatrice walked beside me, her boots crunching on the gravel path. She was in her element, her eyes lighting up with every new sight, every new sound. I couldn't help but steal glances at her, her hair tied back in a loose braid, her cheeks flushed from the exertion. She was beautiful, and I felt a surge of gratitude for that moment. Just being there with her. The trail pushed deeper into the forest, the trees growing taller and closer together. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, creating intricate patterns on the ground. We walked in comfortable silence, the only sound being our footsteps and the occasional bird call. It was peaceful, the kind of peace that makes you forget the world beyond the trees. As we reached a bend in the trail, Beatrice stopped, her gaze fixed on something ahead. "Look," she whispered, pointing to a broken trail sign. It hung crookedly from a post, the wood splintered and worn. Below it, a faint trail of blood led into the underbrush. My heart quickened as I followed her gaze. The blood was dark, almost black, and it glistened in the faint light. Beatrice frowned, her brow furrowing with concern. "Do you think it's a deer?" she asked, her voice low. I nodded, though I wasn't sure. Something about it felt off, but I didn't want to alarm her, not yet. "Probably," I said, trying to sound calm. "Let's take a look." We followed the blood trail, our steps cautious. The forest seemed to grow quieter, the trees closing in around us. The air felt heavier, thick with an almost palpable tension. Beatrice stayed close, her hand brushing against mine. As we pushed through the underbrush, we stumbled into a small clearing. What we found was nothing short of horrifying. A large deer lay on the ground, its body torn apart with brutal force. The carcass was mutilated, pieces scattered across the clearing. Deep claw marks scored the trees, too large for any local wildlife. Dark blood trails led in multiple directions, as if the deer had been dragged, then torn apart. Beatrice gasped, her hand covering her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered, her eyes wide with shock. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. This wasn't the work of a typical predator. It was violent, excessive. And then I saw something strange. It appeared to be several bits of shredded cloth, like fragments of clothes. It looked like it was torn by force and not by cutting. I even caught a glimpse of something that looked like a portion of a hat, the type that park rangers often wore. All of the fragments were weathered, as if they had been there for some time. "Beatrice," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "we need to go." But before I could turn, there was a sudden movement in the bushes. I stepped back, my heart racing, and tripped over a root. I fell hard, my hand reaching out to break my fall. As I landed, I felt a sharp pain in my palm. I cried out, yanking my hand back. Beatrice was beside me in an instant, her face pale. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded, though I wasn't sure. My hand throbbed, and I could feel blood welling up. Beatrice took my hand gently, examining it. "There's something stuck," she said, her voice steady now. "Let me see." She pulled out a small first aid kit from her backpack and carefully cleaned the wound. As she did, I saw it a jagged tooth, sharp and curved, embedded in my palm. It was large, at least 3 inches long, with an opalescent sheen that caught the light. It looked ancient, yet raised. "What is this?" Beatrice muttered, her brow furrowed. "It looks like a fang." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mind was racing, my thoughts spiraling. Where had this come from? What kind of animal had teeth like this? Beatrice carefully pulled out the tooth, and I hissed in pain. The wound was deep, and blood flowed freely. She pressed a gauze pad to it, her hands steady. "We need to get you back to the campsite," she said. "This might need stitches." I nodded, though I knew it was more than that. Something was wrong, something I couldn't explain. As we made our way back through the forest, the trees seemed to loom over us, casting long, ominous shadows. The air felt colder now, the silence oppressive. We both considered just what could have done that, and worse, if it was still in the area. Beatrice walked close, her arm around me, her warmth a comfort. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. That unblinking eyes were trained on us from the darkness. The forest, once a place of beauty and peace, now felt like a trap. A place where the lines between reality and nightmare were blurring. As we emerged from the trees and saw the campsite in the distance, I felt a wave of relief, but it was short-lived. The wound in my hand throbbed, a painful reminder that we could still be in danger of whatever had left that morbid scene. We discussed our plans, and I managed to convince her to stay for another night. I reasoned that it might have been a bear or something, and that we needed to take extra precaution that night, but that it should not spoil our entire trip. She agreed, somewhat reluctantly, and I felt bad, since I did not really believe my own rationalization. What's worse, I kept wondering why there were clothes near the butchered deer. Whatever did, there couldn't have been human, but there were also no human remains. The air that night felt heavy and stifling. Even inside the tent, I couldn't shake the sense of being trapped. I knew we were just taking precautions for whatever might be out there, but I felt an even stranger sensation, like I just wanted to break out and run as fast as I could through the darkness of the forest and find something to eat. My imagination was jolted back to what was happening, and I felt the throbbing in my hand again. The wound, a jagged gash from the mysterious tooth, seemed to burn with a life of its own, but I wouldn't let it stop me. Tomorrow, by the waterfall, I would propose to Beatrice. The thought was a beacon cutting through the haze in my mind. As night deepened, the forest outside came alive with sounds hooting owls, rustling leaves, the distant howl that sent a shiver down my spine. Beatrice slept peacefully, her breath a soft rhythm against the stillness. I lay awake, my mind a turmoil of fear, but more disturbingly, hunger. The moon, a silver orb in the sky, called to me, its pull as undeniable as the tides it controlled. When sleep finally claimed me, it was not restful. Visions assaulted, me probing the forest, the earth beneath my paws, the thrill of the hunt. I was no longer myself, but a predator, driven by instincts raw and ancient. The moon loomed, full and brilliant, its light a cold embrace. I tore through the underbrush, the forest alive with my prey's fear. The vision faded, leaving me breathless and unsettled. Morning brought no relief. The wound was worse, the flesh red and swollen, emitting a faint, unnatural Beatrice noticed my discomfort and frowned, but I brushed it off, not wanting her concern. Hunger gnawed at me, sharp and insistent. I devoured our stockpile of protein, the steak, sausage, and hot dogs. I could barely wait for them to cook on the smoldering campfire. The taste was raw and satisfying, yet it did little to quell the emptiness inside. Beatrice watched me with obvious concern, and I could tell that she was worried about me. I lied and told her I was fine and that I had a surprise for our hike to the waterfall today. The hike to the waterfall was a blur of pain and resolve. Each step a testament to my determination to try and make the moment special. We had arrived and were both taken aback by the natural beauty of the stunning vista. We walked toward the waterfall and watched as it cascaded, a veil of white against the rocks, its roar a symphony of nature. The time was finally right, and I took Beatrice's hand. I pulled out the ring, and she knew what I was doing as soon as I knelt down. She started to cry as I asked her to be mine. Her yes was a whisper, a promise, and for a moment, everything else faded away. Unfortunately, the moment was fleeting. I suddenly fell victim to the worst headache I have ever had in my life. It was sharp and blinding. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't, and I almost toppled over. The world around me blurred and narrowed to a single point of agony. A searing pain that radiated from my temples to the base of my skull. I stumbled, my vision flashing with spots of light and dark. And before I could steady myself, Beatrice's hands were on my arms, her voice sharp with worry. Hey, are you okay? Oh my God, you're burning up, she said, her fingers tightening as she tried to keep me upright. I wanted to tell her I was fine, to brush it off like I had before, but the words caught in my throat. My mouth felt dry, and there was a metallic taste lingering on my tongue like blood. She guided me to a rock near the edge of the waterfall. The cool mist from the cascading water hitting my face and doing little to ease the throbbing in my head. I sat down heavily, my breath coming in shallow gasps, and pressed my hands against my temples, as if I could physically push the pain away. Beatrice crouched beside me, her expression etched with concern. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a water bottle, unscrewing it with one hand. "Drink this," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "You're probably dehydrated from the hike and this fever." "I'm fine," I managed to mutter, but the words felt hollow even to me. My body felt wrong, like it was betraying me. The headache was unbearable, a relentless, pulsating ache that made every thought a struggle, and beneath it, that strange, gnawing hunger lingered, clawing at my insides like an animal trying to break free. Beatrice frowned, her eyes narrowing as she studied me. "No, you're not fine. You've been acting weird all day. First, the way you ate all that food." She hesitated, her voice softening. "And now, this. What's going on with you? Is it the wound? Is it already infected?" I glanced down at my hand, the gash still raw and oozing despite the bandage. It pulsed with a strange, warm heat, and when I pressed on it, a sharp, burning pain shot up my arm. I winced, and Beatrice gasped, reaching for my hand. "Let me help," she said, her voice laced with the nurturing instinct I loved so much about her. "We should clean it again, maybe apply some more antibiotic ointment. I have some in the first aid kit, but if we need antibiotics, we are going to have to leave early. I am serious." She touched my hand, and I felt a surge of something primal and dark rise up in me, like a growl forming in my chest. I jerked my hand back, my heart pounding in my ears. For a moment, I saw fear flicker in her eyes, and I hated myself for it. "I'm sorry," I said quickly, forcing a smile that felt foreign on my lips. "I'm just tired. Yeah, maybe dehydration. Let's head back to the campsite and rest, okay?" Beatrice hesitated, her gaze lingering on me as if searching for the truth behind my words. Then, after a moment, she nodded and stood back up. We started back for camp. The forest seemed to close in around us, the shadows twisting into forms that we watched and waited. I knew then that something was wrong. My head still throbbed and my hand burned worse than before. But the worst part was the call, the anticipation of what was coming next. I felt a thrumming of energy in the ground beneath me that made the pain of my head abate. I closed my eyes as I stumbled along and saw the brilliant silver moon shining in a dark sky above. The call of the moon was more than just a vision. It was a warning, a harbinger of the horror that lurked within. I tried to articulate my vision, too, Beatrice, but I just let out an unintelligible mumble as we moved along. The night air clung to us like a damp shroud, heavy with the scent of moss and decay. The campsite was a fragile pocket of light, the fire spitting and crackling against the encroaching darkness. Beatrice knelt beside me, her hands gentle as she unwrapped the bandage around my hand. The wound pulsed with a sickly heat, the edges red and swollen, oozing a viscous fluid that gleamed in the firelight. "You need to see a doctor," Beatrice said, her voice soft but laced with urgency. She dipped a cloth into the water bottle, the liquid sloshing as she cleaned the wound. The antiseptic stung, but I bit back the hiss, not wanting to show weakness. "It's just an infection," I lied, though the pain was a relentless throb that echoed through every vein. The forest seemed to hum with it, the trees leaning in as if to listen. "We can't leave now." "Not yet." Beatrice looked up, her eyes reflecting the fire's dance. "We can't stay either. This could get serious." Her voice was a gentle push, but I felt the weight of her unspoken fears. I shook my head, the movement sharp. "Tomorrow. We'll leave tomorrow. But tonight, I want to see the moon." She hesitated, the cloth hovering over my foot. The fire crackled, spitting a spark into the darkness. "Why the moon?" she asked, her tone tinged with a mixture of curiosity and concern. I couldn't explain the pull, the way the moon's call resonated deep in my bones. It was a primal urge, a hunger that gnawed at me like the emptiness I'd felt all day. "It's beautiful here. I want to share it with you." Beatrice sighed, her shoulders relaxing. "Okay, but we are leaving tomorrow. No excuses." I nodded, relief washing over me. The forest seemed to breathe with me, the trees exhaling a collective sigh. The wound throbbed, but I ignored it, focusing on the warmth of the fire and Beatrice's presence. As she rebandaged my hand, the forest grew quieter, the usual nocturnal sounds muted. The darkness beyond the fire seemed to press in, alive and watching. I felt it in my skin, a crawling sensation that made me want to move, to run through the trees until the moon was overhead. Beatrice sat back, her eyes never leaving mine. "You're sure you're okay?" she asked, her voice a whisper of doubt. I forced a smile, the gesture feeling foreign. "I'm fine. Let's just enjoy the night." The fire crackled, casting shadows that twisted and writhed like living things. Beatrice leaned against me, her warmth a comforting anchor. But even as I held her, the forest called, the moon's pull growing stronger with each passing moment. I tightened my arms around Beatrice, holding her close as the night deepened and the moon climbed higher in the sky. Tomorrow we would leave, but that night, under the full moon, the forest would have its way. It was the worst mistake I would ever make. The moon was high in the sky, a silver sphere casting an eerie glow over us. The air was thick with mist, and the distant calls of owls echoed through the trees. Beatrice and I sat at the edge of our campsite, with the tent a dim shape behind us. The forest floor, carpeted in moss and ferns, seemed to hum with the night's energy. Beatrice leaned against me, her voice soft with concern. "Are you sure you're okay? You've gotten quiet all of a sudden." I nodded, though a shiver ran down my spine. "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a smile. The moonlight filtering through the canopy above seemed to pulse, and I felt an unfamiliar itch beneath my skin, like ants crawling through my veins. I tried to brush it off, attributing it to the strange wound on my foot, but the sensation only intensified, spreading through my body. Then the moon shone brightly, radiant and full. The pressure inside me was building, a relentless push against my ribs. My breath came in short gasps, and my vision blurred at the edges. The moon seemed to swell, its light burning brighter, hotter. Beatrice's hand found mine, warm and steady. "We should go back to the tent. It's getting cold," she urged, but I couldn't move. The compulsion was sudden, a primal urge to run, to escape the confines of our campsite. I tried to resist, gripping her hand tightly, but my legs twitched, muscles coiling like springs. The forest called to me, a wild, ancient voice echoing in my mind. I need to go," I stammered, the words barely audible. Her grip tightened. "What's wrong?" "You're scaring me," she said. My body jerked, a spasm ripping through me. I fell forward, catching myself on my hands and knees. The world spun, colors bleeding into one another. Moonlight was everywhere, blinding and suffocating. "Run," a voice growled. Deep and unfamiliar voice that wasn't mine, yet it came from my throat. I pushed to my feet as Beatrice's cries echoed behind me. The forest swallowed me whole, darkness enveloping my senses as I ran. Trees blurred past, branches slicing at my face. Moonlight filtered through the canopy, casting dappled shadows on the ground. Each step was a pounding rhythm, driven by a hunger I couldn't name. The sound of leaves crunching underfoot, the burn in my muscles with every stride. Primitive urges surged as a savage hunger gnawed at my belly. I was no longer in control. Something ancient and horrible had taken over. Time lost all meaning as the world narrowed to the run, the hunt, the relentless need. Then, as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. I collapsed, gasping, my body trembling under the high, silver glow of the moon that now hung over a clearing, partially obscured by clouds. I lay on my back, the ground cold and damp beneath me. Blood caked my hands, and my clothes were torn and dirty. Memories came in fragments. The desperate run, the overwhelming hunger, the tearing of flesh. It wasn't until I sat up, my eyes adjusting to the dim light, that the horror hit me. A few feet away, Beatrice's body lay mutilated beyond recognition. Blood pooled around her, staining the earth. My breath caught as my mind reeled. I scrambled to my feet, staggering towards her. The wound on my hand throbbed, a constant reminder of the forest's touch. "No," I whispered, the word breaking in my throat. No, no, no. I fell beside her, reaching out desperately but not quite touching, because the reality was too vast, too horrific. My body shook as I sobbed. I rocked back and forth, clutching my knees, while the forest remained silent except for my ragged breathing. The indifferent moon watched as my entire world was shattered. I lost track of how long I sat there. Time had lost all meaning. Eventually, in a haze, I staggered back to the campsite. The tent was seemingly untouched. I was lost and cannot recall how I ever got back. Now you know the truth. Somehow, that fang, the wound, the moon, it changed me. I consider the old tales of werewolves and laugh in despair as I think about this living nightmare that is my fate. That fang, whatever it came from, it might be just like it worked in the stories. Apparently, you did not just have to be bitten by a live one. The fangs themselves are a curse, and I am the victim. Beatrice, I will never forget you, no matter how badly I lose my mind to this curse. The news cycle is here, the full moon is imminent, it comes tonight. I leave this account of what happened as a warning. I am going to bind myself in a secure location and pray that I cannot escape and hurt anyone else. The call of the forest still echoes in my mind, a haunting reminder of what I have become. I know that the darkness will return, and next time, I might not remember anything at all. I can never forgive myself. Beatrice, I am so sorry. Story 2. I woke up one day and everyone, absolutely everyone, was or is gone. The internet is up, cable is running, electricity and water is still working. Yet there's no one around and I can't get into contact with anyone. No one answers when I call on the phone, and although I can see the messages I've uploaded to social media, I see nothing from anyone else. Just old posts and comments from the day before this happened that don't change when I refresh. It's like time has been frozen, and all the animals, humans, and even bugs have been taken out of Earth. My name is, oh, who the hell cares? Who is gonna see this anyway? This is the only way to keep from going insane. Uploading detailed accounts of whatever's happening to me, even though I have no idea if anyone can see it. If they can see it, then the responses are invisible to me, because I've tried sending SOS messages to family, friends, and even strangers. Nothing big or unexpected happened before that day a few months ago. I'm a regular girl, working part-time in the city and sitting through college lectures when I'm not manning the counter of my local coffee shop. I live, or lived, with my parents and sister who's still in high school, since I couldn't afford to make it on my own yet. I had just come back from a late night shift, working overtime from open to close since someone called out at the last minute, and I took an Uber back home. I used my spare key to get in the house, ate leftovers from dinner, took a hot shower, and climbed into bed. I had no dreams or weird visions or anything. I woke up to the sunlight coming through my window blinds. I looked at the time on my phone and realized I had overslept. When I went downstairs, I heard nothing but the TV, playing an early morning show. My mum loved to watch after dropping my sister off at school. Dad's absence could be explained by him going to work, but my mum's was weird. I looked around for her, but when I didn't find her, I didn't freak out. Not until I went outside. But I didn't do that until an hour had passed of me, eating breakfast and thinking about the classes I'd missed the day before, and that morning I went out to catch a bus since it seemed Uber couldn't find a ride. And that's when I saw that my parents' cars were still in the driveway. Maybe my sister went to school on the bus for once. That was plausible. But what wasn't was my dad going to work without his car, and my mum running an errand without hers. I remember looking into the windows of their vehicles, seeing nothing amiss, and trying their cell phones. It rang and ended with their voicemails. I don't think I realized how completely dead the neighborhood was until I walked to the nearest bus stop. Children's bikes were abandoned on the sidewalk. Cars that would usually be gone during that time of day, because the neighbors worked morning shifts, like my dad, were present in the garages. There was no sign of life anywhere, no birdsong, no butterflies or bees, despite the weather conditions being perfect for them. Everything was so quiet, like an empty graveyard. I felt like something was deeply wrong, but I tried not to think about it as I waited for the bus. The bus did not come after an hour, and traffic was strangely at a standstill. I began walking, traveling further into the city, and that's when I started to grow more concerned by the second. The city was just as dead as the neighborhood. The bus I had been waiting on was parked at a stop on a busy street, with no driver and no passengers. The wind blew grocery bags like they were tumbleweeds across the road, and the buildings, while all lit up from the inside, contained no people, no employees, no customers. You get the gist. At that point, I would have been overjoyed just to see a squirrel climb up a tree. I reacted just as anyone would. I panicked, and I mean panicked hard. I had an utter meltdown in the middle of Broad Street, hyperventilating and curling into a ball, soaked in my own sweat. There was no one around to help me, to call an ambulance, or even ask if I was all right. It was maddening, and it wasn't even midday yet. I walked all the way to my job, found a cafe open but vacant, and then walked to my college campus, which of course yielded the same results. I sat down in the lecture hall, frantically Googling anything on my phone that may relate to what was happening. All I could think was that the entire city had evacuated, and I was somehow left behind, or something like that. No news had been posted since yesterday on every website I checked. When I tried to refresh browser pages, the tabs would turn blank, and then an error message would appear. I went back home, which took at least 3 hours of walking, with sores developing on my feet, and got into my dad's car after finding his keys on the key tray in the hallway, a detail I hadn't noticed before. I was crying as I drove around the city, going around cars that were randomly stopped on the street. I drove past the city border into the next town, which was exactly the same. So I drove to the next town after that one. During my impromptu road trip, I passed by unoccupied airports, the planes all there, since clearly there were no flights taking off. The numbers I kept calling and texting were my family and friends and the police. I didn't know what else to do. Eventually, I pulled over to the side of the road and sobbed and screamed in frustration, rocking in the driver's seat with my knees pulled up to my chest. I cried until I had no more tears left to shed, and my face was redder than a tomato with snot pouring out my nose like a faucet. This had to be a bad dream, I'd thought, or some kind of super elaborate hoax of which I was the sole victim. Day in and day out, I focused on adapting until I came across someone, and keeping myself sane by watching old YouTube videos and saved Instagram reels. I didn't dare go back home. The lack of the sound of my sister's rude jokes at my expense, my dad's laughter at some stupid sitcom, and my mother's cooking only served to give me a deep depression during which I never left my room, so I couldn't be reminded of how alone I was. Instead, I decided to try and make the most of this fucked up situation by traveling, since the world was still functioning, just without the people who made it that way. That's something I thought about a lot. As the weeks passed, I was so scared that the lights would shut off permanently and the water would stop running. So scared, in fact, that it made me want to vomit and pass out. But that never happened. Even reruns of TV shows still broadcasted when I turned on any TV. It was really fucking weird. I mean, really, really weird. Who was keeping the electrical paid? Who was tending to the plumbing? Who was broadcasting television and keeping Wi-Fi servers up? The only catch was that I couldn't see anything new that was uploaded past the day I realized I was alone, meaning no recent news, no live shows, nothing. I tried not to think about this too hard, because to be honest, even though I was glad I could still flush toilets after I used them and turn on lights in dark rooms, the thought unsettled me. It made me feel like I was the center of the universe's cruelest practical joke. But I knew a prank of this magnitude was simply impossible, unless my brain was undergoing some high-tech simulator while my body was in the real world, making me think this was reality, when it's actually a program designed as some mentally scarring experiment to see how a human would react when placed in this situation. At least, if that was the case, there was hope of me waking up and returning to normal society. But again, nothing happened the day before all this. I didn't consent to any experiment or scientific testing. And why would these hypothetical government agents or scientists choose me, of all people? After the first 2 months, I began to enjoy myself a bit. Not too much, but a reasonable amount, I'd like to think. I know it probably sounds crazy from your end, but if I kept making theories and freaking out about seemingly being the only person on the planet, or at least on the continent, then I would go insane. The hecticness of daily life is something we can all relate to, feeling like a cog in the machine and wondering if life is just one trial of survival after another. You might have thought to yourself, am I just gonna work non-stop until I die? Who am I? Why am I doing this? When can I just enjoy life and take it easy without worrying about the future or bills? Well, when I realized that the upside to humanity, being erased hopefully temporarily, was no rules and responsibilities, I looked at things with a fresher perspective. I would keep traveling until I found someone like me, of course, which was making me lose more hope each day, as I'd gone through a few states by this time, but I would at least take a moment to enjoy the peaceful solitude on the way. I've taken the best naps of my life in fields full of wildflowers, went skinny dipping in hot springs, and even went into a restaurant, thawed out the food from the walk-in fridge, and used their kitchen to cook myself gourmet meals to the best of my abilities. So many cars had keys in them, like they were all just sitting there for me to take a joyride in. I did donuts in parking lots. I went into Walmarts and stole video game consoles on which I played offline games on. And I slept in mansions and the best suites of any 5-star hotel. Every door was unlocked, making it unbelievably easy to go anywhere and do anything. One rich person's apartment I crashed in was in a high-rise, and I had an amazing time swimming in a pool on their balcony, which you could see the city miles down below through the glass floor. I always had to have noise playing wherever I went. I kept one earphone in case I heard someone, and listened to music. And I always kept a TV on wherever I stayed. It replaced live human voices for me. It became white noise. I turned my tragedy into serenity. And though I still craved company, at least I could have a decent time until I found help or woke up, or a scientist pulled the cords connecting my brain to the simulator or something. That feeling of freedom and carelessness didn't last long though. The third month came, and I was driving through the Midwestern region of the country in an RV I'd stolen so I could experience van life like those influencers, but without the risk and the money. I was going to the East Coast because I wanted to stay in a beach house. My cousin liked renting them in Virginia, Florida, and the two Carolinas, and I'd always wanted to experience them. Of course, autumn had come and winter was starting, or should have been at least, but it was still warm enough for a dip in the sea. Global warming, I guess. Anyways, night came and I stopped in some random city, choosing an upscale hotel to stay in. Highest floor, biggest room, and a hoard of food from the kitchen, all to myself. I slept like a baby, listening to a podcast, with the flat-screen TV playing some reality show. The lights always stayed on, and in this case, it was 2 bright table lamps, one on each side of the king-sized bed, and a standing lamp in the corner. I woke up in the middle of the night to complete darkness and utter silence. The TV was off, so were all the lights. The curtain was drawn over the glass wall, which showed a beautiful view of the city. When I was sure I had left them open to look at the dazzling lights of the skyscrapers, instantly I sat up and started breathing heavily, knowing in my heart that my good time was over because the electricity was now gone. I figured I may as well just go back to sleep until daybreak, and then go and steal flashlights from the nearest store for the next night or something. But I wanted to open the curtains first. I guess I must have forgotten that I closed them. I pulled them aside, and my heart skipped a beat as I noticed something. The buildings in the city were still lit up. The energy still worked. I scrambled in the dark, pressing the power button on the bedside lamp. Nothing happened, so I felt for the cord, which had been unplugged. I plugged it back in, and the lamp turned on, glowing a soft yellow. Upon a quick investigation, I realized all the lamps had been unplugged, and the remote to the TV was perched on the dresser across from my bed, even though I fell asleep with it on my nightstand. Then it hit me all at once. It felt like the breath had been knocked from my lungs, and I immediately started to tremble. Someone had been in this room while I was asleep, and while that should have made me excited to discover another human, it terrified me instead, because whoever it was decided to fuck with me and leave me in complete darkness, rather than rejoice in the fact they had found another survivor. And if they would truly choose to scare me like this, even though I could very well be the only other human left on Earth, what type of person were they? Had they gone insane? Were they dangerous? Or was this simply proof that all of this was a hoax, and they were now messing with me because I had started to make the best of my situation, and that was too boring for the cameras? I honestly hoped to God the last part was the answer, because while that would be the meanest hoax ever conceived, at least the nightmare would be over. But not so deep down, I knew the prank theory was utterly stupid and wrong. I mean, even if it was possible, no prank would go on this long. I just wanted to believe that over my terrifying reality. After I turned the lights and TV back on, I noticed the door was open showing the dark hallway. Now, I'm not the strongest or the bravest, but I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just go back to sleep. I gathered some stuff and used the light of my phone to navigate my way through the now dark hotel building, turning on the lights as I went. "Hello," I called out. "Is anyone there?" When I got to the kitchen, I took a big carving knife with me, just in case. The dead silence unnerved me to absolutely no end. I searched every room, using keys from the office behind the lobby. It took a while, looking inside closets and bathrooms, but eventually I was able to confidently say that whoever unplugged the lamps in my suite was no longer in the building. I didn't know how to feel about any of it. Half of me wanted to be happy to the point of tears that someone was in this with me, but the other half just knew this wasn't good news at all. I trusted my gut and decided to leave. I got in the RV and drove until daybreak, putting as much distance between me and that place as possible. I became exhausted and parked in the most crowded parking lot I could find, so I'd be hard to spot, then fell asleep. When I woke up in the middle of the afternoon, I started a regular day, trying to put the previous night past me. I toured this city I'd never been to before and browsed a selection of name brand clothes like Gucci and Prada that I would normally never be able to wear as a broke college student. I looked like a celebrity or some fashion model as I explored, looking for any sign of life. One of the things I missed the most was animals, like seeing someone walk their dog or watching a cat nap in a windowsill. When I returned to the RV at sundown, I was met with a disturbing sight. The door to the RV was wide open, and almost everything was out of place. The covers on the bed were strewn on the floor, alongside my clothes and the food, and items I'd stolen from stores, either for survival or pleasure. The cupboards were open, the faucets were left running, including the tub, and worst of all, someone doodled a smiley face in the dust of one of the RV windows. 2 long vertical lines for the eyes and a curve under them for the mouth. This simple picture put so much fear in me I felt like the world was collapsing. Once again, someone had intruded in on my space and deliberately left a sign that they had been there. More than one person had to be fucking with me. Because how did the person from the hotel know where I was? How would they have found me so quickly? There are a million places I could be at. There was just absolutely no way they knew. I'd be in this one city, in this one parking lot. If there was more than one person, then why were they doing this? What did they want? Why don't they just come up to me and talk like a normal human being, so we can figure this shit out together? I think that's when paranoia first hit me. Sometimes I don't think I'm paranoid, and sometimes I do. I don't fucking know, okay? I feel like I'm going crazy. Well, that's when I first started having irrational thoughts, like, who says it's a human to begin with? And if it is a human, who says they want to figure anything out? Maybe they know more than you do about why the world is like this, and they know it's unfixable. So they're deciding to have their sick fun with you because, let's face it, who's around to stop them? The human brain can be so intelligent, but also so masochistic. Mine was torturing me with all these thoughts, until I felt like I couldn't breathe. I decided to pack a bag of the stuff I've hoarded since day one and abandoned the RV. I can't count how many times. I looked over my shoulder as I left to find another car. I felt watched. Once again, I found a vehicle parked with the doors unlocked. Small and black, which is definitely more inconspicuous than a hulking RV the keys were. As usual, inside, and once I got to driving away from that city, it felt like I had a breath of fresh air. However, I wasn't going to keep that car for long, because if whoever did that was around to see me get into it, I didn't want them to be able to recognize the car in whatever place I went next. This time, I stayed on the road all day, only stopping to relieve myself at a convenience store and get gas. I tried to appreciate the sights I drove past, but I couldn't stop thinking about the stranger, which is what I had decided to call him or her. It wasn't long then until I would reach the East Coast, but night came and I had to sleep. I didn't want to give up comfort just yet, but I was also extremely nervous that I had been followed. Although I saw no other cars driving on the road, instead of sleeping in upscale hotels, I decided to change things up a bit, so I wouldn't be as predictable to the stranger. I considered sleeping in a crappy, run-down motel, but I wanted to be absolutely sure they wouldn't know my next move. I parked miles away from my destination, and using Google Maps, which thankfully was still functioning normally, I walked there using back alleys. The sliver of rationality remaining in my brain told me that there's no way. They were in that small town without me, seeing them following me in a vehicle, but I was taking no chances. I found a big grocery store, took the keys out of a random car in the parking lot that I was going to use the next morning, and decided to gather some covers from the domestic section and crash in one of the back offices of some manager. I locked the door, made a pad on the floor, and turned out the light. I ate a dinner of chips and candy, rather than microwaving or cooking, something that would release a smell which would indicate my location. It was hard getting to sleep, but I managed, trying to quietly listen to ambient soundtracks on YouTube, with a Bluetooth earphone stuffed in my ear. Sleep snuck on me, really. I didn't even feel myself drifting off. I was bone tired, but confident that I left no tracks and was going to be safe. I woke up to music, but nothing was playing on my phone. In fact, my phone had died and the screen was black. No, the music was coming from the overhead speakers, an old tune from the 40s or 50s, one I faintly recognized but wasn't exactly too familiar with. We'll meet again, don't know where, don't know when. Someone was playing this over the intercom, and it blared throughout the entire store at an almost deafening volume. I sat there on the floor, swaddled in covers, shaking so hard I could barely grip my phone, as I wondered if it was even safe to leave that cramped little office. That's when I figured I should have tried to find a security room to crash in, as I'd seen cameras installed on the way in earlier. Maybe I could have spotted whoever this was on the footage, but now it was too late. I made double sure the door was locked, and then plugged my phone up to the outlet in the corner, so I could at least see the time. I tried to remain as quiet as possible, in case the stranger was still there. When I powered my phone on, I realized it was 4 a.m., and I decided I would not try to leave until sunrise, which should have been in a couple of hours. I just had to sit and wait until then. After the song ended, I heard something else play over the intercom. Someone was simply breathing into the microphone, soft and subtle, but definitely there. The stranger was still there, and I had no idea how they could have possibly found me. I even checked my phone to make sure my location wasn't turned on anywhere, and went through all my stuff thoroughly to be sure there wasn't some kind of AirTag or tracker attached to my clothes or something. My search came up empty. I stayed in that back office for most of the day rather than leaving at sunrise, like a sitting duck. I was too scared to leave. Hours passed of hearing nothing, No music and no breathing, but still, I didn't dare move an inch from where I sat on the floor. I was hungry and thirsty. I felt like a child hiding under the covers from a monster in their closet. I felt foolish. Finally, I checked my phone and saw that it was evening time. I had to make a move. I looked for anything I could use as a weapon first, and all I found was a pen with a particularly sharp tip. I supposed I could stab someone in the neck with it. My backpack on my back, I crept out the door and realized that once again, the lights had been turned out on me. Why? Was whoever was stalking me trying to make it easier to get the jump on me? I removed my shoes so that my footsteps were quiet, my socks padding on the linoleum floor. The only illumination I had was the street lamps outside, streaming white, almost ghostly looking light through the big front windows of the store, and the fridges, of course. When I got closer to the front of the store, where the registers were, I heard something fall off a shelf a few aisles away, not very far at all from my position. I immediately crouched down and listened intently, holding my backpack so the items contained within wouldn't make a rustling noise from me jostling it around. I heard no other sounds, but I was sure the stranger was still here. There was no way whatever that was had fallen on its own. Tears of fear slipped down my cheeks as I decided to abandon my backpack, deciding the contents of it were not worth the risk of it making a noise or slowing me down. If I had a confrontation, I left it there on the floor as I changed directions, moving towards the back of the store to see if there was an emergency exit or back door I could exit from instead. I should have done that to begin with, but I don't tend to think too rationally when I'm scared at times. Indeed, all the way at the back, there were a set of double doors I could just barely make out. They were the kind that had this big silver bar in the middle you had to push to open them, and those always made a noise. I braced myself, and in one swift motion, opened the doors and slipped outside. Oh my God, it was absolutely freezing cold outside. I did feel the back office get colder throughout the day, but I thought it was because of the AC or something. No, it's because it was snowing. Blankets of snow powdered the air, and the ground was quickly being painted all white. The air felt like I had stepped into a freezer. It had just felt like summer yesterday, and at this time of day the sun was supposed to start setting, but twilight had already fully descended upon the world. The sky was black, not a star could be seen, and the moon was a tiny sliver barely visible. It was barely autumn, let alone early winter, while it certainly gave me a shock. I did not waste a moment thinking about the drastic change in weather. Instead, I made my way around the front and ran to the car I'd prepared to leave in. As soon as I opened the door, all the lights in the store came on, and it glowed yellow like a beacon in the dark. I froze and stared at the windows, my eyes scanning for any movement. I thought, for just a moment, that I saw a dark figure slip out of sight behind a shelf, but it was so subtle that it could have been a trick of my imagination. I got inside the car, shut and locked the door, ignited the engine, and drove out of that parking lot like a bat out of hell. Once again, I cried. All I could think was, why? Why me? Why am I forced to endure this psychological torture? The only other person left here is stalking me, and I think they mean harm to me. Where is everyone? Where did you all go? Why did you leave me here by myself with some fucking lunatic? Why won't any of you answer my messages? Oh, but don't think that's the worst part. The worst part is, it only took 15 minutes for me to run out of gas. even though when I checked the car out the day before, the tank said it was full. When I pulled over at a 7-Eleven's to get gas, I noticed the tank was already open, as if someone had messed with it, and a tube that may have once been connected to something was sticking out still, dripping with a dark liquid. I hadn't noticed before, so desperate to get away, but, indeed, all the way at the back, there were a set of double doors I could just barely make out. They were the kind that had this big silver bar in the middle you had to push to open them, and those always made a noise. I braced myself, and in one swift motion, opened the doors and slipped outside. Oh my God, it was absolutely freezing cold outside. I did feel the back office get colder throughout the day, but I thought it was because of the AC or something. No, it's because it was snowing. Blankets of snow powdered the air, and the ground was quickly being painted all white. The air felt like I had stepped into a freezer. It had just felt like summer yesterday, and at this time of day the sun was supposed to start setting, but twilight had already fully descended upon the world. The sky was black, not a star could be seen, and the moon was a tiny sliver barely visible. It was barely autumn, let alone early winter. While it certainly gave me a shock, I did not waste a moment thinking about the drastic change in weather. Instead, I made my way around the front and ran to the car I'd prepared to leave in. As soon as I opened the door, all the lights in the store came on, and it glowed yellow like a beacon in the dark. I froze and stared at the windows, my eyes scanning for any movement. I thought, for just a moment, that I saw a dark figure slip out of sight behind a shelf. But it was so subtle that it could have been a trick of my imagination. I got inside the car, shut and locked the door, ignited the engine, and drove out of that parking lot like a bat out of hell. Once again, I cried. All I could think was, why me? Why am I forced to endure this psychological torture? The only other person left here is stalking me, and I think they mean harm to me. Where is everyone? Where did you all go? Why did you leave me here by myself, with some fucking lunatic? Why won't any of you answer my messages? Oh, but don't think that's the worst part. The worst part is, it only took 15 minutes for me to run out of gas, even though when I checked the car out the day before, the tank said it was full. When I pulled over at a 7-Eleven's to get gas, I noticed the tank was already open, as if someone had messed with it, and a tube that may have once been connected to something was sticking out still, dripping with a dark liquid. I hadn't noticed before, so desperate to get away, but someone had siphoned the fucking gas. And there's another fucking smiley face in the back window. It was drawn with a black marker. I checked the trunk and back seat, worried someone had hitched a ride without me knowing. Someone knew I was planning on using this car, and they could have definitely hidden here without me noticing it until it was too late. But they didn't. However, they did leave something in one of the back seats. My backpack that I had left in the store. How did they sneak out of there so quickly to put it in the car, then go back inside to turn on all the lights? It made no sense. No sense whatsoever. There has to be more than one. There has to be more than one. I checked it. None of my things were inside. In fact, there were just pictures of me. Dozens of Polaroids, showing me at various times over the past several weeks, stealing from stores, eating food, scouting out cars, and even sleeping. In fact, there was a photo of me sleeping in the back office of that store. How the fuck did they get in? And without me waking up? The door was still locked when I got up. That's impossible. This was too much. I felt the entire world spin around me, but I still got behind the wheel and decided to drive as fast and far as I could. I was dizzy, but I was also so afraid. I almost crashed a couple different times, but I didn't care. I was in pure survival mode. That was a couple days ago. I'm writing this on my phone. I've been sleeping in my car with a knife ever since, and I plan on locating a gun store when I get to the coast, so I can arm myself better. Although I've no idea how to use a gun. I park my car deep in the woods at night, away from any buildings. Landmarks just make me easier to find. It's not long now until I get to the coast of North Carolina. I plan on getting on a boat and getting out of here. I'm not going to do anything crazy, like sail to another continent, but I'm going to skirt the coasts till I get more down south. I don't feel safe traveling on land anymore. I'm going to keep updating as I go. This is the only thing that keeps me sane. I have hope that someone will reach out or something will happen. I just think. TGI found me. I was typing and I heard someone. I think it's a man. He was outside my car. I drove into a tree and ran on foot. Help me, God, help me. He was running FTR me. I'm hiding, RN. If I don't update again tomorrow, Pols, tell my mom, I'm sorry.